So today I'm going to talk about a different kind of relationship, but a relationship that is no less deep or impactful than the therapist-client relationship. Today I'm going to talk about the enduring influence of parenting during adolescence and even late adolescence. Much of the work looking at parenting or caregiving relationships is based upon John Bowlby's attachment theory. John Bowlby suggested that for an infant to grow up healthy, psychologically healthy that is, they needed more than just food and shelter. They needed warmth. They needed nurturing, an emotional bond or connection with a parent or a caregiver, and a relationship that both the infant and the caregiver found satisfying and enjoyable. Attachment has been associated with a wide range of child outcomes, from sense of self-worth to their emotional skills, social skills, behavioral problems, as well as the ability to enter into healthy, intimate relationships later in life. So a considerable amount of what we understand today about parent-infant relationships, parent-child relationships, and the influence on children across development is based upon attachment and the importance of these relationships. It's oftentimes easier to see the ways in which children need parents or adults in their lives when they're very young. As infants, they need adults for survival, to feed them, to change them, to soothe them. As toddlers, we continue to provide these as well as support as they become more independent, as they learn how to walk, how to verbalize their wants and needs to others. And as children, they continue to be faced with wonderful and exciting new challenges and opportunities. Parents and caregivers may help them when they start to go to school, as they learn how to make friends and how to regulate their emotions in more sophisticated and adult-like ways. But by the time they reach adolescence, oftentimes they can do many of these things by themselves, and it may seem like they need or perhaps want their parents or caregivers in their life less and less. It can be more difficult to see how teenagers still need parents in their lives. It might even seem like they prefer spending time with their friends, and that they'd rather ask their friends for advice than their parents or other adults who are too old to really understand what it's like to be a teenager. But the amount of time that teenagers spend with their friends compared to their parents doesn't mean that parental relationships no longer matter. Relationships with parents, caregivers, or other caring adults in their lives continue to have an impact on adolescents, particularly their emotional development during this time period. And work in my child and adolescent lab has focused on the attachment relationship during adolescence, particularly different features or characteristics of the attachment relationship. And what we've found is that when adolescents and even late adolescents report their attachment relationships with their parents or caregivers as characterized by a sense of trust, a desire and an ability to communicate with their parents, and low levels of alienation or emotional distance from their parents, that's associated with healthy adaptive emotional regulation skills. These young people are less likely to suppress their emotions or to hold their emotions in. They're more likely to communicate and express their emotions to others. They're also more likely to reappraise or to think about situations from multiple perspectives when they're feeling really intense, difficult emotions. It's also associated with an increased ability to regulate their expressions of emotions in ways that are constructive, healthy, and adaptive for them socially. We've also focused specifically on a sense of parental alienation or emotional distance or isolation from parents during adolescence. And parental alienation during adolescence and late adolescence has been associated with higher reported levels of emotional reactivity. So a tendency to experience frequent emotions, but also frequent intense emotions that are difficult for them to regulate. It takes them longer to calm down after they've experienced these emotions. It's also associated with higher levels of anger and sadness rumination. So when young people experience things that make them angry or upset or sad, they're more likely to replay these events over and over and over again in their mind, either increasing their feelings of sadness or anger or maintaining those emotions for a longer period of time. Parental alienation is also associated with more difficulty regulating emotions and controlling their emotions during adolescence and late adolescence. And difficulty regulating emotions is also associated with mental health concerns, specifically with higher reported symptoms of depression, anxiety, disordered eating, and aggression for young people. So I'd like to suggest that parental or caregiving relationships still matter factor in adolescence, particularly with regard to their emotional development, because they're still developing emotionally and learning how to cope with stress and life as it comes their way, and how to regulate and express their emotions to other people. And that can in turn impact their mental health. But it's not always fun family time with teenagers. Sometimes there's conflict with teenagers, especially as they're learning and figuring out how to be more independent. For those of you who have teens or have parented teens, it may have seemed at times like they weren't listening to you. You didn't know how to communicate with them, or you didn't necessarily understand them. So far in my lab, we've focused on different aspects or components of the attachment relationship. But as we move forward, we're going to focus in on parent-adolescent conflict. We're really excited because we're going to be looking at the what and the how of conflict. In other words, we're going to bring parents and teens into the lab, and we're going to record them as they disagree and argue about something that they routinely can't reach a compromise on. They can't see one another's perspective. So we're going to be looking at the content, what they're saying to one another. We're also going to be looking at the how they communicate. These are great examples of parent-adolescent conflict. So we're going to be looking at things like gestures, body language, sarcastic tones, eye rolls. We're interested in verbally what they're saying to one another. We're interested behaviorally in how they're communicating with one another, but also related to Bowlby's theory of attachment, we're interested in how they impact and influence one another. Because Bowlby said that it was important that these relationships be satisfying and enjoyable for both the child and the parent. And so anyone who's a parent in this room or who's spent a lot of time with kids would say that they impact you as well. And so we're interested in not just the impact and influence of parents on adolescents, but also how adolescents impact their parents or caregivers. So we're going to be looking at things, for example, like a teenager rolling their eyes at the parent and how that might evoke a feeling of frustration in parents. In addition to looking at what's going on in the conflict conversations they're having, we're also interested in neuroendocrine indices of stress. And so we're going to be assessing that by looking at their cortisol through their saliva after they have these conversations. And then using cutting-edge observational encoding software, we're going to be able to look in real time at the overlap and the influence between what they're saying to one another, in other words, the verbal content, as well as how they're communicating with one another in relation to their physiological functioning, indicated by the black line at the top. So for example, we might notice parent says, "because I said so," and we see an increase in the teenager's heart rate. Teenager rolls their eyes or says, "whatever," and we see the parent's heart rate spike. Using another software system, we're also going to be able to look at their facial expressions while they're communicating with one another. And we're going to be able to code and identify the different emotions that they experience and express. Because while parents and teenagers are having these conversations, they're likely going to experience, but also facially express, a myriad of different emotions and fluctuating intensity of emotions, which you can see by the different multicolored lines here. So we are really excited about where we're going to be headed in the lab. We're going to be looking at the verbal content, the way in which they're interacting, the different emotions they're experiencing while they're communicating with one another, as well as their levels of cortisol, and how all of this is related to their overall emotional functioning, their mental health, and their physical health. Thank you.